We're in New York and Mr. Depp was in Boston at some point?
Eventually, by May 2014. That's it.
All right. And what, if any, discussions or arguments did you have with Mr. Depp relating to James Franco in that time frame of May 2014?
It's a nightmare. I wanted to do this independent film. I liked the story. I liked the character. I told him I'm not going to wear makeup in the thing.
Objection, hearsay.
Apparently,
Ms. Bureau, if you could approach, please. He was mad at me for taking the job with James Franco. He hated James Franco, and was already accusing me of kind of secretly having a thing with him in my past since we had done Pineapple Express together.
okay. So I'm going to take you to the Boston plane incident. We've heard about that earlier, May 24. Can you please describe for the jury what took place on May 24 relating to the plane incident?
Well, I had spoken to Johnny, he's in Boston, I'm in New York, and I spoke to him. He had already been upset with me and accused me in many arguments about not telling him about scenes that I had. If I had a kissing scene, any sort of romantic scene, and I wasn't explicit about what I was going to do, then I was accused of having withheld information and hiding it from him. So I didn't want the fight, of course. I didn't want the argument, but I had to kind of eggshell tiptoe around how to tell him when I had any sort of scene like that. And I did tell him in this occasion.
Objection, hearsay.
Okay, we need to stay with what Mr. Depp said, okay?
Okay, so he was upset with me, but he didn't sound coherent so much on the phone. He was yelling at me about how could you tell me this? How could you tell me this when I'm filming, when I have this scene that I'm doing? How could you tell me this when I'm working? Obviously, I couldn't tell him any other time because we were both filming, and I told him as soon as it was relevant, but he kept saying, how could you tell me this? How could you just tell me this? And it was like I had told him I was having an affair or something, he was that angry at me. But he kind of started to sound less connected to reality as these arguments would happen on the phone. This is in one day. Eventually, he hangs up on me in the conversation, screaming at me. I talked to his assistants. I won't say what they said, but I had conversations and felt encouraged that I could continue on with the plan, which was for me to get on the plane, go to Boston, pick him up, and we would go back to LA for his daughter's birthday. I was nervous because the conversation I had had with him, and he was so upset with me on that conversation, but I figured I assumed he had passed out and that he would have been kind of sobered up the next day, assuming that the work would mean that he felt pressured to kind of pull it together. And I get on the plane. He sent the plane, so I assumed he's not that mad at me. He's over it. We're moving on. He's sobered up. I'm sitting on the plane for a very long time waiting for him, and he finally opens the door, and I see him get out of the SUV, and I can guess by how he's moving, how he's walking. I didn't realize at the time I had already become really sensitive to these little changes because my life changed depending on what he was on. And he gets on the plane, and I just knew in every cell of my body something was wrong. And he comes straight up to me, doesn't say anything to me, but is looking at me. He's got these glasses on and he takes them off in this kind of aggressive manner and sits down across from me, not in the usual spot. We'd kind of have our places on his plane, you know, where you get used to sitting. And I remember I got up and moved to accommodate him getting by so he could sit in the normal seat as per usual. He didn't. He sat across from me. At some point, and I don't really remember the exact sequence of it, we take off, and at some point he's asking me what's wrong with me. What do I have? Do I have something to tell him? Do I have something to tell him? You want to talk to me about your day yesterday? And then it gets, I already know that he's drunk. I already know he's using, he reeks of weed and alcohol. I mean, his breath smelled so bad, and I could, I could anticipate that there was a no-win situation here. There was no me talking myself out of this or talking him down or any, you know, a lot of my arguments and my involvement in them are me trying to diffuse by explaining or
Objection, non-responsive.
She's telling the story, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection as part. Good. Okay.
So he is asking me questions, and I know to not engage. I was polite. I made sure to answer minimal amount of, you know, the minimal amount that I could. I moved slowly. I was trying to be polite, but not engage because there was no win. And he kept going, kept asking me. Eventually he went from, do you have something to tell me, to, you want to tell me how much you liked it? Tell me, did he slip a tongue? It got worse and worse, just more. It went from asking me about how my kissing scene went or how the sex scene went to asking me what James Franco had done in the scene, to being really explicit about my body. You know, he was talking about my